Yeah, good morning, everyone. All sort of here. Was that a good morning I heard back? Or?
Good morning.
Good morning. We have a few people awake. For me, it's just about midnight, so anyway, we'll keep going. So we're going to talk a little bit about lean this morning. So how many of you are working with lean in your organizations? Okay, so a few in the room and others are finding out, or perhaps you're lecturers or something like that. So in terms of what I'm going to do is a little whistle-stop tour on a little bit of what I think lean is about, a little bit of why it might work or why it might not work, a framework to think within, and then just one or two very quick examples of how you might go about doing this lean approach. And this is really based on about 20 years of research and trying activities to make lean work. And I started out my lean journey in around about 1990. Spent quite a lot of time working with Toyota in Japan to try and understand how this worked. Brought that back to the UK, set up the Lean Enterprise Research Centre, which became the largest worldwide centre in lean. And then we started to say, how do you apply this into different industries? So we started to work in the supermarket industry, because we saw that as a very different sort of industry than high volume manufacturing, with the Tesco organisation, which probably might not be known to everyone in the room, but they moved from 13% market share in the UK to 30% market share. They tripled in size and they increased their profits over 15 years by a factor of 7. So that was the application of lean into a quite different industry, which needs quite a bit of modification. And then we started to learn about how did you take lean out of just the traditional sort of operations area, particularly the shop floor manufacturing. How did you take it into different business processes like winning business, developing new products, managing the supply chain, etc., etc. And the third journey, which I suppose I've been on for the last number of years, was really around how do you create a sustainable journey. And we wrote this book called Staying Lean. This is the first edition. If you buy it, it's better than the second edition. But I didn't tell you that. Basically, what we found for many organisations, whether they're using lean or they're using other sort of similar approaches, is that businesses sort of do some improvement, and then if you come back and look at it in 2 years' time, you quite often can see very little evidence of the improvement. So things don't sustain. So what we found was the essence was not how do you get a program or lean going, but how do you create a sustainable journey for running the whole business, or we talk about a lean business system. So as you'll see in the credits at the end, there's a number of LinkedIn groups called Lean Business System or Lean Business System Australia, New Zealand, etc. About 70,000 members who are interested in this sort of version of lean. So a little bit about what lean is about. So how many are familiar with the word Muda? Muda meaning waste. Mura. That sounds like a Maori word to me.
Unevenness.
Unevenness, very good. Yeah. And Muri?
Strain on.
Yeah. Okay. So few of you are sort of familiar with this, but I mean, if you ask the layman what lean is about, traditionally the answer is, well, it's about reducing waste and reducing cost and so forth, which is fine and good. And when you look at the research we've done, you could probably say, on average, an organisation spends at least 50% of their costs on stuff that customers don't value, which is quite a sobering thought when you think of the typical margins organisations work in, which is a few percent or maybe 10 at best. So there's a lot of opportunity to get rid of waste. The second one is around creating more evenness. So anyone find that certain seasons of the year it's more busy than others? Or certain days of the week, or certain periods, you know, etc. And certainly if you're working in a supply chain, in a sort of manufacturing or service organisation, you'll find that sometimes orders come in big lumps and it's quite difficult to work with. So the second area is reducing that unevenness. So remove waste, get the process easier, shorter, quicker, reduce variation, sort of do that. So it's a sort of do both. And the third area, which frankly I think is the most important of these three, is mooring, which is reducing overburden. Now let me take an example. So let's say we're going to do some lean, and we're going to have a fantastic job, and we're going to be 20% more efficient at the end of it. So gentlemen over here, we don't need you anymore, so goodbye. Okay, now we've learned what lean is about. Should we do some more? Okay, I've exaggerated to make the point, but you see what I mean? If you start with let's get rid of waste, you can start with a rather negative sort of message in the organisation. However, if you start with this end, which is about burden on the individual. So, gentlemen, I just sat there. Anything you find frustrating in your job? We've only got 3 hours, so just the summary would be. But, you know, he's going to tell me a number of things in the conversation. Okay, how about if we pick the 2 or 3 most serious of those, and in our lean activity, should we see if we could do anything about that? What do you think? Do you think we might get a more sustainable journey? Yeah. So this stuff is a lot about the psychology and the people aspects rather than the what I call the Spockian effect of lean. You familiar with the Spockian approach to management? Like in leaders like this, Mr. Spock? It's logical, so we must do it like this because our engineers have told us so. Yeah. Funnily enough, that doesn't work too well with most people in organisations, and particularly in offices or service organisations. So we need to balance that with the sort of human side. And if you look at why lean will work, or any other sort of improvement framework, there's a number of reasons why it will work. There's a number of reasons why it won't work so well. This is one of my PhD students who was a mature 60-year-old working as a factory manager in a manufacturing environment. And John Lucy, he'd done a great job. He won a Best Factory of the Year award in the UK. But his PhD was reflecting on how could this be better. So he developed this series of 10 reasons for failure, which is probably a little bit strong if you just won an award, but why didn't it do better? So what is this about, this stuff? Is it about 5S and value stream mapping and TPM and OEE and all those sort of lean things? It's about people, it's about leadership. So the problem is how lean is often applied is a very sort of engineering, it's logical, so make it so type of thing. And then we've got these HR types wandering around doing this sort of leadership development course, often sort of on off-site, building bridges with planks and all this type of stuff. But because it's too sort of ethereal for many to grasp, when people come back they forget about it. So actually what we need to do is we need to bring the sort of technical bit, and we need to bring that social people bit, and actually have not 1, not 2 or 3 programs of improvement, but we need the way of running the business. So we need to bring both of these sides together. So like many of you, when I started my lean journey, I thought it was all about the tools. And that's why I went to Toyota. What are the tools? Tell me the tools. And I asked them, what's the secret of Toyota? I mean, this was a young guy, you know, what's the secret of this sort of stuff? It's the silver bullet, you know. And they gave me, I interviewed about 50 senior Toyota Japanese executives, and they all told me the same answer, pretty much word for word. And they said, it's the rigorous and disciplined application of Toyota production system. So, full as I was, I wrote down Toyota production system, Toyota production system. And it took me a long time to learn that I hadn't been listening to what I'd been told. And actually the important part of the sentence was the rigorous and disciplined application of, and it could have been Mickey Mouse at the end almost. It was actually about this stuff that was actually the more important thing. And Toyota have now actually renamed Toyota Production System TPS, They now call it Thinking People System. This is about Thinking People System. So what we find many organisations applying Lean, and certainly when I was running the workshop yesterday, I'm sure we got any victims from yesterday. They were too beaten into submission to come back. But anyway, it was sort of summary of yesterday. Is mostly what they were saying in New Zealand is that people did pretty tangible improvements, a sort of, whether it's a 5-day blitz or a project-based improvement, and that's sort of great, but it sort of bits fade quickly, and then it sort of plateaus maybe a couple of years in, and we had some of the government people saying, well, how do we now think about our program going forward to support industry, because they were seeing some of these effects as well. And what we found was that a few organisations go through this true Lean. This is actually a gentleman from Whirlpool's slide. And what we mean by that is much more this sort of running a business, thinking about the whole Lean business system, thinking about the culture change, and you could call it the pink slippers sort of end of Lean, but it's the stuff that enables this to work and creates this sustainable journey. So I don't want to over-egg the cake. I'm not saying do the blue and don't do the black. What I'm saying is you need the appropriate balance of the two sides. For most people doing Lean, it's usually too much black and not enough blue. But it could be the other way around, so I'm not saying that's necessarily the case. And the Staying Lean book we wrote around a multi-site, multinational organisation going down this sort of Lean route, who'd done this in a very successful and sustainable way. And the book we wrote about this framework, this Lean iceberg, and the reason we use the iceberg analogy is if you go to the best Lean organisation, so who would be reputed in New Zealand to be the best Lean organisation?
Rio Tinto?
Rio Tinto, maybe? Okay, well we can debate that one later, but anyway, so if you go into the best organisation, typically what you'll see is evidence of tools and techniques. So you'll go round and you'll see some boards and they'll have some 5S audit stuff, or you'll see some TPM activity, or you see some Kanban cards, or this is the stuff that we see. If you ask the right questions, you'll see that they're generally looking at end-to-end processes, like the whole process of fulfilling customers' orders or generating new business, etc., rather than just local optimization. What you won't see is the below-the-surface stuff, the strategy, the alignment, the behaviour, the leadership, the engagement. That's the secret of really making this stuff work, not the above-the-surface. So many, many organisations I go into, you can see good evidence of above the surface, but that's probably a gentleman called Bob Emiliani, a researcher in this area in the States. He calls that fake Lean. Fake Lean. It looks like you've got Lean, but you haven't really got the embedded structure to make it work and sustain. So the book talks about these elements, but in reality, the framework that we've developed and we've used that sits underneath that is this one here, which we call the Lean Business Model. And the idea of the Lean Business Model is with an organisation, you can think about these are the areas that you need to think about running a business with a Lean lens. Where are you on this stuff? Where do you need to be? And how do you develop your own program? So the idea of a Lean business system is the system, if you're from a business, that you need for your business. What sort of, you from industry or you manufacturing? So if you're from manufacturing, what you need will depend on the industry you're in, the circumstances in the market. It'll depend on how good or bad you are on these. It'll depend on your strategy. It'll depend on how good or bad you need to be in these different areas, which almost certainly is going to be different from the gentleman behind you and the gentleman over there, because you're all going to be different. So the program that you need is fundamentally going to need to be tailored to the organisation. So this model actually came out of that early work with Toyota. And what I established was when you look at the typical Lean implementation, it's pretty much, if you were to draw a little triangle around the tools and techniques going into the middle, which is the process management. That's pretty much what it looks like, so a triangle, you know, in this area. It's tool-based with some sort of diagnostic process mapping, value stream mapping, cycle, you know, whatever tools are used. Whereas what I established working with Toyota and with Tesco and many organisations since, like Cogent Power, was that really to make Lean work, it's that vertical axis that's absolutely key. So the top box is about purpose. Where are we going, and is everyone in the business going in the same direction? The middle is managing the end-to-end processes, and the bottom is about leading, inspiring, engaging people. So if you remember anything from the talk, purpose, process, and people is really the key to make this sort of stuff work. So if I look at each of these segments briefly, so strategy deployment. The vision, goals, and strategy are clearly communicated throughout the organisation with key measures, targets, and activities appropriately deployed. Of course, anyone interested in measures would probably be in the KPI session somewhere else in the building at the moment. But so key thing is we've got to have a strategy, we've got to align and engage everyone in the organisation to it, and most importantly, we've got to have a management process to make that actually work. So probably one of the best measures of whether an organisation is lean is to go in, ask someone quite junior, not senior, quite junior, and say, can you tell me what we're trying to achieve in this business at this site? And you find a lot of people can't answer that question. If they can, the second question is, well, what does that mean to you and your team, and what do you need to do as your share of making the organisation successful? Most people can't answer that. And if they can answer that, the very few percent, maybe 1 or 2%, tell me what you're doing, the small number of projects in your area that are going to make tomorrow better than today, which rolled up with all the other teams is going to make for the successful organisation. Follow that logic? Think about your organisation. How many people could tell you those 3 questions? So probably what I saw comparing this Toyota style with what I saw in the West, the biggest gap was probably in this area, that we were pretty misaligned, and as a result, if people don't know where they're going, it's often difficult for them to get engaged on a journey. So actually, this is pretty key. So an example of that is deploying, what are we trying to do and why, etc. Just to give you a practical example of that, this is a visual management board. How many of you are using this type of visual management? Yes, some of you. The key to this is certainly when I look at in Europe or work in Australia, for example, what I find is many people have what I call visual displays, but not really visual management. We also call it wallpaper, because it's about as useful as wallpaper. So just to give you, I don't know if we have any German speakers in the room. Hopefully not, because I can just make up what's on here. Okay, well you can tell me when I've gone wrong. So this bit is what I call visual displays. Nothing wrong with visual displays as such if they're there because the team has put them up to celebrate success and hence try and motivate themselves to go further. So in this case, there are some before and after pictures that the team was proud of. This was the new layout for the work area the team had developed. They were proud of that. So when visitors came, they were pleased to tell them the story. This isn't about running the business though. And often what I see is organisations have charts on the wall and metrics on the shop floor that seem to have nothing to do with the operators, and that's what I would call the wallpaper syndrome. Whereas this area, so if you take that top bit, this is basically saying the business needs to achieve that, so what do we need to do in our team? So the team has taken that strategy, developed their framework, developed their plan for the next number of months. This is what we need to work on, this is why we need to work on it. And then this is the series of projects the team has decided, not cascaded from the top, they have developed the how, not been told by senior people. So the what we need to achieve and why is cascaded down. The how are we going to do it is developed locally, and then they pull in support from the senior people or the lean coaches to help them, rather than the classic we'll push solutions onto people down lower that actually don't solve their problems and get them frustrated, etc. So these are the projects they've decided to work on. This is the colour coding of how well are they doing on KPIs. If the KPI is not under control, they need a corrective action. Part of the corrective action is they need to raise a project to do something about it. And also colour coding of the projects. Are they on track? If not, we need to do something about it. If they're red, which a few of them are, that means they put their hand up and ask for help. So you have to develop a leadership style quite different, where it's good to ask for help, rather than we tend to hide problems because we don't want to expose them. So this actually needs quite a bit of management and culture change. And this is a middle level in an organisation. This is a weekly meeting, lower down to a daily meeting. Just to share this one, this is the sales office. This isn't shop floor, this isn't manufacturing. This is everywhere in the business. You see this in quality, in purchasing, in the tool room, This is how they run the business. So, other areas of business. I have to move quite fast, I'm afraid, but anyway. If we look at the people area, of course, this 5-segment model is a sort of artificial split of the world, so the people engagement and alignment sort of joins together, but accountabilities are clear at all levels. Leaders motivate and develop their team, an environment where you can realise people potential. So we need to know what the accountabilities of people are. So for example, how many of you are using standard work in your organisations? Standard work instructions? And that would be typically like an A4 sort of laminated sheet with a sort of do this, don't do that. Do you have standard work for managers? And the general manager? No. Okay. So this is about saying, well, standard work is usually interpreted as you're on this machine, this is how to do it well, this is what to look out for, which is fine. But accountability is making them clear. What is the standard work for a team leader? What is the standard work for a manager? What is the standard work for a leader? I'll show you a little bit of video later, and the senior people talk a little bit about that, which is basically saying for an operator, it's maybe 80-90% standard work, 10-15% around the boards looking at improvements, etc. As you go up, it might be 50% standard work for a team leader, 30% for a senior manager, which could be, as a middle manager, it might be saying, well, actually, between 9 and 10, I have 5 lower level teams around one of the yellow boards, so between 9 and 9:30 for their big weekly meeting, I'll attend, and then between 9:30 and 10, I'll have a coaching session with the supervisor to see what support. And hence you do that every day in different areas. You see how that's what I mean by standard work extending to other people. So it's not as big a percentage of time, but it's the same concept. So this is about creating the what should people do at different levels. What is their role? How do you lead in this environment? Lead in this environment. And realising people potential. What we find typically in sort of Western environment is a large part of people in organisation are working at a lower level than they could be, are achieving less, are probably frustrated because problems are not being solved. And actually, for many people, it's take the brain out when you go into work, pick it up on the way home, and look for self-actualization by running the football team or scouts or something like that outside the workplace. So a lot of this is creating a different environment where you get more out of people, get people into the sort of stretch zone. So, I can't go into all those in huge depth, but if you think about what we should do with people, how we should think of work in an organisation, fundamentally, for most of us, or many of us certainly, we don't think of work in the right way, is my view. So, if you think of your organisation, from senior people the other end to frontline people at this end, the percentage of time we spend doing different activities, what you find is senior people spend some time deciding on I say, how are we going to improve? What are the big projects? But they're too busy to do them, so they give them to middle managers. Middle manager goes to a local area of this lady and says, I want half your team for the next 3 weeks, that'll be fine, won't it? Funnily enough, no is the answer. So the chances of it working well are low, the chances of it sustaining are very low, because you might have these two ladies freed for a few days, but at the end of that they're back to the normal job, because we only value the day job. So the bizarre thing is we value the day job, but actually the research shows that over 50% of the day job is waste. So we value waste, but we don't value improvement. Does that sound slightly odd? Here's another one. If I was to give you a copy of this book, don't worry, I'm not going to, fine. And you were to go back to work on Monday, and you were to spend Monday reading this book and working out how you're going to apply lean and what's your roadmap, etc. What do you think your co-workers would say as they walk past you? You just had a week off last week having a jolly in Auckland, and now you're wasting a day sitting at your desk. And actually, my guess is probably half of us would be sitting there feeling slightly guilty. We weren't
We'd be reading it at home.
Sorry?
We'd be reading it at home.
I'm reading at home.
Yeah.
That's very sad. So, but isn't something wrong on how we're thinking of work? We don't value what could be the most useful day next year, but we value the 50% of stuff we create waste. So, if you think about this people side, unless we start rethinking work, in fact, unless we start rethinking how we run a business, unless we start rethinking what improvement means and why we need to apply it in the organisation at what levels, the chances of creating a sustainable lean journey are small, frankly. So, ideally, everyone should be doing strategy. I'm not saying people at the front line of designing your new factory or your new office or whatever. Why not? Sure, that's another idea. But everyone is thinking how tomorrow could be better than today. What are the small number of things they need to work on, and how might you do that? Everyone spends some time doing improvement. The day job becomes a smaller percentage, but actually, as a result, you double or treble your productivity. Now, this is ideal state. How close you can get to that, I don't know, but that's for you to think about. And actually, during this journey, the style of leadership is going to change. You probably need to be drive and champion, but you need to be more facilitate and support as you get further down. If we think about the process stuff, we need to focus on the needs of the customer, identify waste, and drive to a future state. I can see one or two of you thinking, oh great, we're going to get onto the lean stuff now. Well, this is part of the lean stuff, but if you don't do the other stuff, this won't work. So yes, this is only part of it. So this is understand the voice of the customer. Most of us probably don't do that, although we know we should. This is understand which mapping tool that we should choose. This is undertake mapping. This is the classic big picture mapping approach, value stream mapping, understand the needs of the customer, look at the waste. And that map's very good at doing MUDA. It's not very good at looking at variation. This map, for instance, demand application map, is very good at looking at variation. So you probably want to do more than one map together because you want to look at that and that. And what I found with people doing this sort of diagnostic is the biggest predictor of the improvement program they put in place is the mapping tool they choose. So mapping tool A is good at finding these three wastes. What do you think your program's going to look like? Mapping tool B is good at these three. It's going to look completely different. So you need to be careful how you choose the map. So I'm not going through every mapping tool, but be careful of this is the mapping tool and will do the job. And hence, identify where you are, think about the ideal state, and then think of maybe one or two feasible future states to get you there. Actually, this model works equally well at the process level. It also works at the business level of developing your whole roadmap for creating a lean journey. I'll touch back on that in a minute if I don't throw it off. Anyway, we'll keep going. I'll be very nice to my friends at the front here. So, tools and techniques, again, great. We're on to the real lean stuff here. So, do we want another half hour on tools? No, probably not. Okay, good. Let's move on. So, there's a house of lean. The only difference between this house of lean and many others is this is the house of lean to apply the tools. All the other houses of lean, and there's 1.2 million on Google, are how to do lean. This is only 1/5 of lean, not all of lean. And hence, applying this into the extended enterprise, the end-to-end, which is where most of the benefit came in Toyota, actually we found in the research 82% of the competitive advantage of Toyota in Japan is nothing to do with Toyota. It's actually to do with their supply chain. It's actually how they've developed and improved their supply chain, primarily using a tool called Kurofukai. I just made that up. We call it supplier associations, and that was what I was focusing primarily in Japan. Then I helped Toyota do that approach in the European facilities after that. But basically, it's extending the internal stuff into the supply chain, looking end to end or as far as is feasible, doing the usual look for waste, look for non-value adding, look at waste between organisations, etc. This was some work with Tesco. This was 97, which was actually a pilot for this program. We looked at the flow of materials from a cola manufacturer through to the checkout. So 6 points where inventory was held. And then we said, righto, how much waste is there? So here we were making bottles of cola selling at 60 cents, 2-litre bottles 60 cents, so very, very cheap. We found that a lot of cost was in this logistics, because making cola, frankly, isn't very expensive. Most of the cost is shipping it around. And we actually used the metric of the number of touches as an easy way to... So how many touches do you think there was from the end of the production line, where clearly there'd been some value add, to the checkout? Any idea? So pick it up, put it down, put it on a truck, take it off a truck, put it on a shelf. 12? 15? Okay, we'll shortcut it. It's about the middle of that, so 27. And it doesn't take a genius to work out that's rather a lot of touches, adding not much value to something. So we developed a rule of thumb at Tesco, which became a very rigorous framework. Whenever you see waste, get rid of 2/3 of it the first time you improve. So what we said is, well, 27, not all of that's necessarily waste. So we said, what's the ideal state? And we decided as a team that there was one value-adding step, which was when the customer took it off the shelf and said, is this actually the product I want? Is it the low sugar or whatever? So we had to get it down to 8 to 10 touches. So this was 8 to 10 touches. Instead of the purple line is the line of guess. Do you use the F word here in New Zealand? Yes. I heard there was a lot of use of the F word on Saturday, just after a certain rugby game going on. I don't know why that would be, but yeah. Yeah, forecast. I'm not going to say it again, because I know it's not really... we use in the UK the right word, which is guess. How am I going to run my space? What am I going to guess? Is it going to go right? Well, of course not. So actually moving the line of guess backwards. So if you think of, instead of having a supply chain with, I don't know, 15 days inventory, sell one today, make one tomorrow, get it back on the shelf the next day. That was the principle of basically this pull system, which means that you can not only improve efficiency, but you can eliminate certain parts here. So let's go and make this more efficient. Wrong, let's get rid of it. So this created a 30% lower logistics cost, and actually, let's pack it on the shelf. So this program was called One Touch Replenishment, which was ideal state. This then morphed into One Touch Replenishment. It then morphed into shelf-ready packaging, etc. So this is just one example of the sort of things that we were thinking about and applying at Tesco. And you've probably seen some of this stuff coming in into the supermarkets. Yes, this sort of stuff. No, yes, yes, good. Okay, so all sounds nice, doesn't it? All sounds wonderful, fantastic. Just go and do it. Well, not quite that easy, because for some organisations you might need to start with one thing, and others you might need to start with another. So I'm going to give a couple of extreme examples where we started just in one of the 5 segments. Usually it's a bit in all of them, but these are extreme examples. So one of those was a water industry, a company called United Utilities, which is a utility provider for about 8 million people in the UK, largest water company. And their processes were so dislocated by functional silos that we just started by understanding what the processes were, understanding how they worked, understanding how you improve the process, and did really nothing else for the first roadmap of 18 months. We started to get into details of, well, actually we need to change the leadership, we need to get the right metrics, but we started with a process framework. And with a sort of classic pre-plan, mobilise, diagnose, plan, do, check, act, to actually take these a step forward, get rid of 2/3 of the waste, get a higher performance. So that was all fantastic, worked really well, and then started to move on to different areas of the lean business model. But that was an extreme case because of the extreme functionalisation in the business. Another example where there was so much antagonism between people on the shop floor and the people in the management that first day we were with them, they were out on strike because of some minor dispute had blown up. You know, it was just completely, the leadership, the engagement was terrible. So there, we just had to work on that people and leadership and develop local improvement for local teams in local areas. So this organisation is called Argos. I have no idea what the equivalent would be here, but it's a high street retailer, jewellery.
On Goodson at the moment, we've seen a lot of changes from the way that the organisation has changed. We've put things in place such as where good and bad pallets go. We've got workstations now that are down on the bays as well, which are a lot more structured in where you need to have things placed, calculators, catalogues, so that everything is there where the team member needs it to be to do their job first time at the right time.
General health and safety, cleanliness of the place is a lot more organised now. What's coming on the base is getting tipped a lot quicker. There's less downtime where people are waiting around for containers to come on the base. Everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing and what is expected of them.
Well, having received the containers in from the gatehouse, we now have a log that the clerks write down, so we know that if they've said they've delivered and we know that they've actually arrived. Communication between the shunters and the clerks and how we get containers onto the bays.
I've been involved in the changes from the start on dispatch. Originally we used to have bars and stuff, a load of straight bars. They'd be all over the place, you leave them on the floor, trip hazards. Now we actually have holders to hold them in, so easier access for your batch, you find it straight away. You've also got the workstation, much more organised, everything's where you want it to be, easy to find, and just generally a lot easier to work.
On dispatch how it used to be, let's say it was firefighting. There was no organisation, no planning, so every day you come into not knowing where you were. With the changes what have been involved, we know exactly where we are, we know what we need to achieve, and we can plan from that. So we don't spend half the shift firefighting where we should have been to get to where we need to be.
The main differences are that the team have been part of making the changes on the department. In doing so, they've been helping to kind of make the jobs a lot easier for themselves. We've had audits brought in so that when they're going to use the power pallet trucks, they're readily available in good condition and then checked on a shift-by-shift basis for them. Along those same lines, we have bay checks, which again at the start of each shift, each team member checks their own bays to make sure there's no damage. Everything's in working order. It's just so just to make sure that all the equipment is available at the right time for them.
I find the PDCA management process useful because we have regular meetings weekly to discuss improvements to the business processes. This also talks about what the teams do, the team members, And also we can talk to the management about where we are with the improvements and if we need their support.
Well, we've gone from being in a position where we used to struggle to kind of put structure together, plans for making improvements. We had a lot of people on site with a lot of ideas, and we were very, very good at creating those ideas. We were never actually very good at executing them and actually making improvements. The good point about the Plan, Do, Check, Act is that you can come up with a structured plan for the improvements, follow it all the way through to monitoring it and acting on any anomalies that arise after that. So it's really, really good at making the ideas and the improvements stick.
We have a mixed reaction. We've got some people that have been here for quite a long time. We had a change program about 2 or 3 years ago. We had both good and bad points and people sort of ingrained in those processes. I think what we're trying to do now is unlearn some of those we did a few years ago and now try and embed some of the new practices. Some people love it because it's nice to be managed, have a nice clean environment, respect about what they do every day. Others find it difficult because for years doing the same thing repetitively, so find change hard to adapt to. So let's try and break those cultural changes in our business. It will happen overnight and see how it will be the thing that drives it either, or things need to support that mechanism as well.
My working day is a lot different nowadays. There's a lot more structure and discipline involved in it. The biggest challenge we've got at the minute is sustainment of the continuous improvement journey and continuous improvement changes that we're doing. So the majority of my day now is spent on the shop floor talking to people, performance conversations, speaking to team members, team leaders, seeing any issues that I can help with. And to be honest, I wouldn't go back to how it was before at the minute. It's a lot more organised.
My role used to be pretty freewheeling. Typically I'd come in and then decide how I could spend my time most effectively towards the operation. What I do now is I tend to lead, which means that the front line is protected and given priority. Whilst I still have that sort of discretion, my days are much more structured. In large parts of it are taken up now with structured meetings around CI and supporting the operation, supporting the front line so that they get priority, and I think it's freed up about a day a week of management time.
So we won't go through a detailed discussion about that, but what you could probably see from that video is you could see some tools and tech. You could see shadow boards, you could see visual management, you could see, if you look carefully, an RPN board. So we've done process FMEA work to understand, etc. But I think probably what you saw from the video was more around the culture that had been created in that organisation. It was a culture of, these are our problems, we'll work it out, we'll work out how we're going to do this, we'll ask for support, the structured approach that was put in place. And in 6 months they doubled productivity. We didn't start with a strategy saying deploy double productivity. In an organisation where the workforce was on strike, do you think that would have worked? No. We just asked them, what are your problems? What are your 3 biggest things? How do we solve them? We started solving them, and hey presto, we got a whole load of double productivity out of it. But actually starting with a very people-centered approach. And as I say, each example is slightly different. Those are sort of fairly extreme examples where we had one particular issue to address. More typically, it's a look where you are on a lean maturity against the 5 areas. So this particular organisation was here. Where do we need to be in 3 years' time? Where do we need to be in 18 months? By the time we'd taken this organisation to that point, they were benchmarked by group. This is actually the 20th largest business in the world, a company called Vale, which may not mean anything. The lady who mentioned Rio Tinto might be familiar with them. Big mining company, Brazilian miner, biggest in iron ore, they're big in coal, nickel, other metals. By the time we got them in 18 months to this point, they were benchmarked as the best Vale site in the world. But interestingly, on the survey, the Brazilian consultants came in and they gave them 0 on 5S. They said, we're going to give you 0 on 5S. You are the best site in the world. We're going to give you 0 because you don't have a policy of applying 5S in every area in the organisation and have no plan to do so. So you get 0. But by the way, you will have the best 5S in any site in the group. We were sitting there thinking, is there anything wrong with this survey you're using here? Are you actually trying to take the business in the wrong direction? Because actually this is the best site in the world. And actually what you're doing is a survey of how many people are doing 5S, how many people are doing value stream mapping, how many people are, rather than actually what the business needs to be successful. So what we find with an organisation is the way to really make this thing work is to develop your own roadmap. So this is actually the one for the Valet organisation, which has stuff in yellow on the strategy deployment, stuff in what looks like a yucky green on the value stream, the process stuff. The blue is the people engagement, leadership training stuff, and the purple is the extended enterprise. Doing it within a plan, do, check, act environment, and then this is the detail. So this is what took them from pretty ordinary to best site in the world. This is not rocket science, it was just the right things in the right order at the right time, doing it quite simply and just getting them on the journey. So now we're on the second roadmap, and we'll see where we get to on that. And that's about the end of what I'm going to say. Quite a quick sort of whistle-stop tour. We could easily bore you for a whole week on this stuff, but hopefully there was a few things for you to take on board. Do we have time for
I was just
questions?
going to say, we've got a minute or so. Are there any questions of Peter?
Yes.
One presentation. Besides the my time at Toyota too, did you see much as the process flow charts, the old industrial engineering work study, and when they wanted to define the true value of a step in a process?
Oh yeah. I mean, Toyota are very good at the traditional industrial engineering stuff that we really let go of, the old time emotion sort of study stuff. I think the trick is, instead of men in brown coats as supervisors, like we did in Britain in the 50s and 60s, coming and doing time and motion to people, you get the people in the teams to do time and motion to themselves, and then you're not shoving solutions on people that feel bad. They're actually trying to improve themselves.
One more.
Yep.
Okay, in order to make the lean to be sustainable, so how can you build the lean element into the system? For example, ISO 9000, something like that.
Okay.
Building it into the system.
Well, may be heretical, but I wouldn't start with ISO 9000.
Just like because it's a management system, right?
Yeah.
It's a centralized system.
Yeah.
So how to build this lean element into this?
Well, I think my answer is I wouldn't start with ISO 9000, but if you have started with ISO 9000, I would start by taking the management through what's this stuff around, what do we need to do, and then have the conversation of how it fits with ISO. I think ISO is better now, it incorporates an improvement system rather than a compliance system, but I still wouldn't start with ISO. I don't know if there's people populating ISO in the room, so I'll tell you, I wouldn't start there.
Can I ask you to thank Peter for his presentation?